census coming out that it is so important to participate because it impacts how it affects us. New York and California know that all too well. They lost some representation this go-round. Dr. John Green, who's the vice chairman of the 2020 Mississippi Complete Count Committee, is joining us this morning to talk about Mississippi and the impact of the census on us in particular. Good morning, Dr. Green.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. So let's talk about the census, because some people don't understand really the importance of this data that comes in from all the work that's being done.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The census is actually required as a part of the U.S. Constitution, and as a country, we've been doing it every decade since 1790. And the main purpose of it is to allocate the seats in the House of Representatives. But then the data, in addition to that, are used for so much more in terms of, planning, districting, and then also the allocation of funding.
When we look at growth and we look at a demise of a state, we're seeing a lot of population departing out of New York and California, the East Coast and the West Coast, particularly. Cost of living, there's a lot of factors involved, the politics, the cost of living. Texas, Tennessee, they're seeing surges because those people are flying to those states. When you look at something like that, is that something that's a good thing that's happening in our country, or and politically, is it a good thing for conservatives?
Well, I think this kind of realignment as part of population change is part of a kind of regular cycle that we see over time. And certainly you see growth in the South. The southern states as a total region is the fastest growing region in the country, just about 10% over the decade. And it's important to understand that while a large part of that is due to net migration, more people moving into the region than moving out, it also has to do with our birth and death rates and how those balance out is an important part of the equation. What we see, interestingly, in Mississippi is that we don't have that same level of growth as you see in other states. And it's not that growth in and of itself is always, challenge-free. There's all kinds of problems of meeting demands for, services and everything else that people need. But nonetheless, that Mississippi is having a different experience than most of the region.
Is this a good time for Mississippi? We look at Tennessee, which is a relative neighbor to us, and Texas. We have a lot of families here who have, I have family in Texas and Tennessee. And so when we look at Mississippi, and we're not seeing the growth, which would obviously bring in a tax base and energy to our state, should we do something more to try to take advantage of this situation of people leaving these other states?
Well, I certainly think, approaching, development in the state holistically, thinking about everything from, education to cultural opportunities, obviously job growth, and also not just attracting, industries to come into Mississippi, which is obviously important, but also how do we retain and expand our existing businesses. I think that if we take kind of that holistic approach, we can see, hopefully fewer people leaving, but also attracting, more people to come here. And I should say right now we're talking about statewide numbers, but of course there's variation, right, within the state, different regions that may be growing in population and others that are losing. And so these state numbers kind of mask that variability that you see within the state.
Dr. Green, when you look at the dark side of this, the growth that's happening in Texas and Tennessee, again, I have family in both states. The biggest concern that I have, and I'm sure many conservatives feel the same way, is that what's happening is when folks are coming in from California and New York with their mentality, with the way they've lived their life, with the way their political beliefs, they come into a state and they want to change that state. They want to bring their thoughts and ideas, their liberal positions into a state and change it. My future son-in-law lives in Tennessee, and he has been sharing some threads where some of these folks that have been moving in have been sharing on social media about how backward the state is in Tennessee and how it needs to be changed and how they need to do this and how they need to do that. And you just look at these states and you wonder, particularly if Mississippi were to change, that you got all these people coming in taking advantage of lower tax tax rates and housing prices, well, it's only natural that those housing prices are going to go up. Look at Austin, Texas. I mean, it's blown up in the last 10 years. And so is that a concern of yours for conservatives about changing the political landscape of our country even further because of this influx of new people going to different places?
Well, I think that I could see that as a concern for people from different perspectives. But if you look at the states that lost seats compared to those that gained seats, there's kind of a realignment nationally. But then, as you point out, then that has an impact where people are going. I think to a large extent it kind of balances out in terms of the political equation. But this all demonstrates the importance of participating in the census. We think about voting as an important way that we participate in exercising democracy, and participation in the census is equally important. It has an impact on what places are represented by how many people, and also how funding and how other priorities are determined and allocated, and has a central place in terms of how we run our government. And not just at the federal level. I mean, these numbers coming out this week have really been focused on the federal level, but these data are also going to be used from your local races and also your state races, and what those districts look like for your state.
We're talking to Dr. John Green, who is the vice chair of the 2020 Mississippi Complete Count Committee. Dr. Green, when we look at Mississippi and we come back home, what kind of participation did we have in the census, and were you pleased with the returns that you got back, or do you think we could do better?
Well, I certainly think we could do better. We as a Complete Count Committee, and then the committees across the state, really focused on that self-participation rate. The people who respond, directly and actively. We were a little bit lower than we were in 2010. We had about a 60.4% self-response rate. But the Census Bureau does all kinds of what we call non-response follow-up. And so about 39.5% of the population then was accounted through those different ways. That includes what you think of as those door knockers, the folks going out, and then also how we count college students and so forth. And so in the end, the estimate is that 99.9% of the population was enumerated. So we feel really good about that, feel really good about those numbers. But the self-response rate every decade is really the goal, to increase that. I would say that, we want to do better, but bear in mind, this was the year of a pandemic, so it changed everything. Combined with, this was the first time that people could participate in the census online, which really helped to streamline the operations. But Mississippi has the lowest rate of broadband access in the country, and so it's not surprising that continued to be a challenge. But overall, we feel really good about the data in and of themselves.
Was there anything that surprised you about the data that came back?
I would say probably the biggest surprise was just that we had, when I say we, both the Census Bureau and the State Data Center that I'm affiliated with at the University of Mississippi, we had expected, based on estimates and projections actually for Mississippi's population, to be a little higher than it came in at. Part of that it's a moving target. You're trying to estimate each year what the population is between these censuses, and then also trying to project out into the future. So we were surprised that it was a little bit lower than was expected, but not much. And we certainly anticipated the little bit of loss that we did see. Mississippi's population change between 2010 and 2020 at about a loss of about 0.2%.
So that when you talk about people, how many people are we talking about when you talk about 0.2%?
Yes, we're talking about a change from about 2,961,000 to 2,967,000. And in terms of thinking about the allocation of resources and so forth, we think about the decisions that are made on the basis of census data, and many of those decisions are required by law to incorporate the utilization of census data. It can be anywhere from about $3,000 to $5,000 per person per year. And so we look at that difference in population and estimate that it could range from about $18 million the $30 million difference for Mississippi.
That's